Hi, welcome to Blooming Into You. Kristen here. How are you guys doing today? I have a very special, amazing guest with me today. My former podcast partner, Becky Barber from our podcast, Try Self Love, is joining us today to talk about grief. And I'm really excited. Becky, hi, how are you?
I am doing really great, Kristen. It's so good to see your face. How are you?
Oh, it's so good to see you too. So good. Yes. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited about this episode. I know it's about grief, so I shouldn't be so giddy, but it's so good to see you. So I'm excited.
It's amazing to be back with you. I'm missing our podcast days, but so proud of you for taking this on by yourself.
Well, thank you. Well, you have a lot of good things to share, and I think what I'm going to do is just introduce you a little bit about what you're up to right now, and then we'll just get going. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. Okay. So, Becky Barber is a devoted wife and mother. She became a health coach and life coach in 2020 and will soon complete her master's degree in social work and become a grief counselor. With a compassionate approach and a commitment to holistic well-being, Becky empowers clients to overcome challenges and embrace personal growth. Her unique blend of life experience and professional expertise, equips her to guide others through life's toughest transitions, offering support and resilience through every step of their journey. Wow, this is amazing. Yes, I knew that you were back in school and getting your master's degree. That's amazing. How's that going for you?
It's going. I have 6 months left, so I'm at the tail end of this semester, and then I have one semester left, and I will be
Oh
graduated
my
and ready
gosh.
to kiss school goodbye.
Yes. Ah,
Yeah,
it's so good. It's so hard to go back to school and you have a family and busy life. So good job. Good for you. I know that's a lot. So,
thanks.
well, you're going
Thank
to
you.
bless this world with help that people need, truly, especially for grief. It's such a big, huge component of life in so many ways, right? So, why do you want to specialize in grief? Why grief?
I mean, you do what you know, right? So I know grief. I've had a lot of loss in my life, beginning at age 11. A lady that I really dearly loved at church. She was going to be one of my leaders coming up, and I turned 12 a few months later. She actually died in a car accident at the tender age of 22. So I kind of just jump started a lot of different losses in my life. My uncle when I was 13, my dad when I was 22, my father in law when I was 32. Just different things. I've lost two boys, she's stillbirth, and just lots of loss, lots of miscarriages, and moved around a lot, so there's loss in that. There's just a lot of loss in life, and you're right when you say like grief is universal. And unfortunately, we don't really act like that. We kind of tend to bury our head in the sand and pretend it's not really happening to us until you don't have that luxury anymore. So I just want to be able to help people who have to go through it.
Hmm, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, that's really this is very impactful work that you're doing. And you're right, people take it for granted, I think, they just kind of move along and maybe don't even process their guilt or their grief. Is that right?
I think it depends on the circumstance and culturally what they perceive to be grief and loss. And just, I mean, we know when someone dies, you get like maybe a couple days of work off, but it's
Mm.
almost insulting to think someone should be back to normal after those 3 days off of work. So, but I mean, loss, we see it. COVID, lots of loss of what we consider to be normal or safety. That can be lost. Your identity can be lost. Abilities, just different life circumstances that take things away from you. It's just part of life, but I don't think we handle it very well overall, if I can make stereotypes. I don't think America handles grief or loss very well. I don't know about other countries because I don't live in other countries, but we
Mm-hmm.
don't. We just,
I
like
think
you
you're right.
said, tend to pretend it's not there. Yeah.
I think it's like
Yeah.
everything in life that we do when we run away from our feelings, we just, moving on. So what do you think you've learned from your losses that you've experienced?
Um, it's just not something you get over or really ever get to the end of, I would say. I think depending on the type of loss and your support system and maybe your sensitivity levels just to the different parts of life. Like it could just stay with you forever. I consider it this gaping hole in your heart, and it's really big at first, like that first initial period where you just feel gutted and everything is just acute. And you just notice the hole because it's so big, there's no way around it. And then with time, I think it can shrink with time and healing, and then you learn to maneuver around it, but it's still there, and you can still be triggered unexpectedly out of the blue. You never know what's going to trigger you. Could be a bluebird, could be a fall, like the fall, could be just a song on the radio. You just have no idea what's going to trigger those thoughts, and then they'll come right back. So I've just learned to drop the expectations of getting over it and expecting other people to get over it, and to think that you will go back, because there's no going back. That doesn't mean that there's no joy or hope. It's just, it's never going to be the same again. Grief is change. And isn't that true about life? Life is change. It's constantly changing. So grief
Absolutely.
is just forced change that you weren't really prepared for, really.
Right. Exactly. That's a good point. That's a very good, important point to make. And I just wonder, like, do you find that it's helpful to just be with the grief and just accept it the way it is, the way it shows up? Does that seem to help you, not resist it by pushing it away and being like, I don't want this? I mean, sure, there is that part of the grieving process, I would imagine, but do you find through your experiences, it's almost like better to be with it and just allow it than to try to push it away?
Yeah, so what you're describing is like denial, right? Which we have those 5 stages of
Oh,
grief, which were
yeah.
loosely given, not as like unilateral, this is the path and then you're healed. Those were actually given for patients who had cancer. So it was just different ways to describe what stages they would go through, and it's nonlinear. But denial, sure, that's definitely part of it. We don't want to believe that this is real. It hurts too much. And in that initial phase after the loss, your brain will go into shock, and that's just to protect you because it's too much pain. Our brain can only handle so much. And so maybe you're functioning just because you have to get the funeral or celebration of life ready. You have kids that need you. Like, whatever your circumstances, you can still be functioning, but it doesn't mean that you're at the top of your game, or that you've even faced those residual feelings of loss that are going to come at some point. And I also think it depends on who's around you and how comfortable they are with grief. There's a lot of pressure to just be happy, pretend, fake it till you make it, right? And so that adds shame on top of the grief, which makes it so complicated and very difficult to get through. So I do think people will react the best way that they can, and there's no reason to judge them for it, just to sit with them and let them grieve the way they're going to grieve. Everyone's going to grieve differently. I know for
Right.
me, I didn't know what I needed. So people would either not want to talk about, especially with my babies. Nobody wants to talk about babies that have died. And so it's like, okay, can I talk about my son, or am I going to make other people sad and uncomfortable? So now there's this pressure on me not to make other people sad when they're around me. And I had a friend who's like, I've always wanted to know how you were doing, but I didn't want to remind you of him. And the truth is, he was always on my mind anyway. So I guess what I would tell people is you're never going to get it perfectly right with someone who's grieving, but don't stop trying. Reach out to them, be there for them, give them some space to talk about their loved one. Because that's really what they're dying to do, is just have someone who could handle it. And the message that they're usually getting is, I can't handle all your emotions, so bottle it up, please. Pretend for the rest of us. And that is very destructive.
Right. There's a feeling of going into a trauma reaction of fawning and pleasing when you're trying to grieve because you're afraid you're going to burden people with your,
Mm-hmm.
negative, quote unquote, negative feelings, right? And so that shame is there to keep you like from, you know, spewing it out, right? Like, don't be too much for people, right? And so you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you shouldn't grieve openly. Other people feel afraid to ask because they don't want to make you upset when you need to be upset, right?
Right.
You need to
Right.
have people holding space
Right.
for you. Yeah, no, I like what you're saying. Um, but it's such a complex web of, reactions we have to grieving because we aren't allowed to even, aside from grief, we're not even allowed to be ourselves usually authentically in this society. So we have oh,
Hmm.
now my mother died and I can't even be sad because nobody will accept that I'm sad and like get over it, right? 3 days off work and you better be fine. It takes a long time. And we, like you
Right.
said, we never know where someone is in the process, how they're going to grieve and how long it's going to take. So it could take a long time and it does come back and forth. So very interesting. So what is your take or what are your thoughts on time heals all wounds? Is that a thing or is there an
Mm.
endpoint?
Uh, is there an end point? I don't believe so. And I don't mean to say that you'll be sad for the rest of your life either. Just that you will never get over that person if you loved them, right? Grief is that price we pay for love. And so it's just everyone's going to die. Everyone. We don't like to believe that. We really don't. And I'd always say, like, no matter what age the person was when they died, it will always be too soon for their loved ones because we don't want to say goodbye to people that we love. Personally, from my religious standpoint, I think it's just hard for us. I believe we're eternal beings, and so goodbyes don't make sense to us. So we kind of are like resisting, like you said, we're angry about it. Like, why was this person taken from me? We should be together forever, right? So
Hmm.
it's hard. It is. I do want to say for people that are grieving, just expect people to say the dumbest things. And they don't mean to be
Yes.
hurtful. They are just trying not to feel themselves. And so they want you to feel better so that they're not hurting with you or I mean, sometimes people think grief is contagious. I don't know. I can't figure it out, but they do say the dumbest things. So if you are grieving, I think it'd be, if we can anticipate this, it would make it a little bit better and just try to hear people's hearts. I had someone
Yes.
say, "Oh,
Hmm.
well, you have other kids. Why are you
Oh,
sad about that one?"
oof. Yeah.
And I never get on the spot, but I later was like, what if I said, well, you can always get another husband? Why are you so sad about that one? Right? Like,
Right.
think before you speak. Just say you're sorry. So sorry for someone's loss. That's all you need to say. You can say, hey, do you want to tell me a little bit more about this person? Or if you knew the person, share a memory. Give them, like I said, give them that opportunity to talk about it. That is way more valuable than trying to throw some platitude out there that's just going to hurt.
Yeah, I definitely thank you for saying that because I have said the dumbest things around death, and I'm like, I have been like, why did that come out of my mouth? And then I will start nervous laughing, which makes it worse because I'm like, oh no,
What did
Betty,
you
no.
say? I want to hear
I
this.
don't remember. I was trying to think while you said that. And also somebody said something to me when my mother passed away that was really dumb. And I knew she didn't mean it. But it's just like, why do we say these really weird,
Because we're
odd things? We're
uncomfortable.
so uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I
we are.
appreciate you saying that because I'm definitely guilty of that. And I wish I knew if I think of it, I'll tell you this. I'm not ashamed to share it. I just can't remember. I just
Sure.
remember going,
No, I'm glad. I'm glad
foot
you're
in
not
mouth.
beating yourself up over it. Yeah.
I'm not. I apologize
No,
immediately.
we all
It was
do it.
really bad, but yeah, it's so weird how I think that's really common that people do that, right? Like around grief,
Mm-hmm.
like they
Yeah.
just say like that thing though that somebody said to you, like that sounds like I don't think I said something like that, but that sounds so wow, like that. Did that person feel bad? I mean, that's a really I don't know if I could ever say that to somebody. I'm not acting like I'm above it because I know whatever I've said is very stupid, but that sounds like wow. Like
Yeah.
I know she or he was trying to like make you feel better. I can sense that, right? But it's like, oof, like that hurt when I heard you say that, you
Yeah.
know?
It hurt really badly. I
Oh,
mentioned it to her later. I couldn't deal with her for a while, and
oh wow.
she, I think, felt a lot of shame because our friendship ended over it. So, I mean,
Oh
that's
goodness.
that's a real thing too. Like I didn't want that to happen, but I was trying to tell her so that in the future she wouldn't say that to someone else. So I think you're right. Like, we all do it. I'm not saying no one should ever make a mistake. That's part of what I was saying earlier, is like, you are going to make mistakes with someone who's grieving, but don't give up.
Yeah.
But also maybe think a little.
Yeah. Right.
None of this, God needed them more than you. That is not true.
What about like,
Right?
they're in a better place now. How about that? Is that, yeah, that
I
doesn't
don't
make the
think that
person feel
helps the
better.
person who's still here. Yeah.
We always
They're
say
like,
that.
I don't care. I
Very
want them
common.
here.
Yeah, like, okay.
Yes, that's another thing. I think that people say it because they hear it and they think that's what they're
Hmm.
supposed to say. And I'm just hoping, I would love to start a movement where we don't say stupid things. We just say, I'm so sorry for your loss.
You said,
Tell me more about your
okay.
loved one.
Well, Becky, you've had so much loss. I mean, you are
Yeah.
like a professional in this area, seriously, and you are becoming a professional in this area as well. So, I mean, honestly, your expertise is very valuable, like about, because I mean, just all the different people that you've lost, right? Like a young adult, your father-in-law, so adults, your babies. I mean, and just friendships and things throughout your life, moves you've had. I mean, all these different kinds of losses are really important. And you have a lot to say about this. I think you should start a movement. I mean, really, you can help people with this because we don't know what to say. Grief is just something we don't
Right.
talk about and don't know about at all. I really
Right.
feel that way, you know? So how do you feel
Yeah, I
like,
wish we talked about it more.
yeah,
Let me interrupt you really fast.
okay.
I'm an expert on my grief. I'm not an expert on grief.
Okay.
This will be a lifelong pursuit as I help other people, but I have had some opportunities. My practicum is at a university here in Tennessee where I've been working in their counseling center. And a lot of these students are dealing with the loss of a parent or a loved one very close to them, or a friend who has died by suicide. Like, this grief is everywhere. So if I could start that movement, I would. Unless it means I have to be on TikTok, then I guess I'm out.
Okay. Yeah, we'll keep TikTok out of it. But you should definitely start that movement, and I'm going to be harassing you. So don't worry. You're going to
Okay.
start it. It's a good movement.
Yeah.
Good thing to be impassioned about, I should say, you know? Um,
Hmm.
so how do you think family members or friends can best support someone who's grieving?
That's such a good question. I mean, I mentioned it and I've said it a few times now, but I will say it again because it needs to be said. Give them space to talk about the person they lost. And if you end up crying, that's okay. Crying is really good for us. It helps us de-stress. It helps us release a lot of pent-up emotion, releases some serotonin. Like, it is really good for you to cry. I don't know, get more comfortable with these negative, we call them negative emotions, but we are not robots. We are meant to be sad when things are sad. We're meant to feel that loss and not just bury it and pretend things are okay, because I tried burying some grief and it just leaks out into the rest of your life and will take over and cause disease and all kinds of problems. So let your loved one know that it's okay with you, that you can sit with them in that. And if you're uncomfortable, tell them it's okay. Be honest, but just, like you said, give them that space. We heal in community. We can't heal alone. And so if someone had a safe person to cry with, that makes a huge difference. If they don't, I recommend grief support groups. You can find a grief counselor. That's important as well. I will say, I had a client last week come in, and this person had recently, like within days, lost someone very close to them who had been in their life for 10 years and was like, I can't grieve, I can't cry. And I was like, well, how long has it been? And this person said 3 days. And I was like, okay, it's going to take time. You can't force it. You can rein it in and then bury it, and that's a problem too, but you also can't force it. That causes problems as well. So you just got to let it unfold. And like you said earlier, we're all so different. Everyone has a different timeline. And that's important to remember too. Let them do it their way. And I would say if someone is having a really hard time functioning after like 3 months, that's a good period of time to maybe meet with a grief counselor or a support group. But 3 months is really not that long. If someone is crying every day for 3 months, that's normal. If they're not crying, that's normal, right? There's no normal because grief is so individual, but don't rush someone to the doctor or to the therapist a week or two later. Like, it's going to take time. I think that's what we need to just understand and give ourselves that understanding if it happens to you. Like, it's going to take time. It takes as long as it takes.
Right.
There's
Well,
no deadline.
especially because, initially you are in denial and shock, and that can last for a while. And
Mm-hmm.
this isn't a linear
Mm-hmm.
process, as you mentioned. So you will go into, if we are using the 5 stages, let's say, you will go into that shock initially, and then you might fly into bargaining, or you might fly
Anger.
into sadness
Oh,
or
yeah.
anger at some point.
Yeah.
Like you might go
Mm-hmm.
back and forth, and acceptance is the very last thing, right? And like you'll get to certain levels of
Not really.
acceptance, right, you'll accept a
Right,
little
because you
and you'll
can
go back and
accept it.
forth, yeah, and then
Right.
not really, you still have
Yeah.
to, like, at
Yeah.
least for me in my own loss process, I've had to go into the sadness, the depression part, and it's like a purging, and then I'll get to a peace or an acceptance of the situation. Okay. And depending on the situation, that can happen many times, right? Like you go into, you get, and will you ever be in full acceptance of the loss of somebody very close to you? Like you're saying, perhaps not, but you can move forward and you can be happy again and you can live,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll still always feel that loss. So yeah, like you're right. Like the 5 stages aren't, they're a good guideline, but they're not necessarily like whatever that may not happen entirely for everyone or fully,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Right.
So yeah, like what you're saying
Right.
about how don't rush somebody to like therapy within a couple days or weeks, because they aren't even probably at a place where they can handle it unless they say they're ready for that.
Right.
And it's like we want to rush everything so much. Talk about TikTok. I mean, no offense
Yep.
against TikTok, but that's one of those quick hits and like, oh, I see it, I see it. Now I'm laughing, now I'm crying, now I'm excited, now I'm dancing. But grief isn't, and feelings about anything are not to be rushed, but they are to be expressed.
Right.
Don't bottle them up, as you're
Yeah.
saying, but also allow time. There's got to be some time with this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But to answer your original question, like the passage of time is not just going to mean that you're healed. No. Time
Yeah.
passes regardless. It's like you're saying,
Right.
like feel that feeling, find a safe place to express it with others and let it be. Let it be part of you because it's your new normal now.
Right. Time heals all wounds is, I don't really love that expression, because for this
Me
or for
neither.
trauma either,
Me
it's like
neither.
people are like,
No.
well, the trauma happened to me, the abuse happened to me when I was a kid, I'm over it. Okay. That doesn't mean anything that you're a grown up now. You still have those parts of you that are wounded that didn't get looked at, talked about, touched on, anything. Time doesn't matter in healing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just heal and then maybe it'll actually happen in a shorter amount of time. You never know. It could be time heals all wounds within a year, or 3 months, or rather than, oh, now I'm 50 and now I'm fine. Like, oh, the person passed away when I was 13, so
Yeah.
I'm fine because I'm 60. If you didn't grieve it, you're still carrying it.
Yeah. And your body will find a way to force you to heal. So it's better to intentionally try to heal than let your
I
body
know.
come back at you.
I know that it's like I
As
say
you
that
know.
thing about the
Yeah.
universe with the frying pan. It'll find a way to make sure you find enough pain in your life,
Yeah.
outside your life. And it could be with many different losses, right? That compound in
Could
order to
be.
make you finally forcibly have that grief experience, I would think. I mean, I don't know if that's your experience. I mean, I don't want to touch too deeply into an area you may not want to touch into, but you've had a lot of losses. And do you feel that because of the compounding of them, have sort of been forced into finally grieving, or have you been grieving all along appropriately, would you say?
That's such an interesting question because each of these losses are so different, like you said. I think the hardest one has been the second stillborn son, Bennett, just because I told myself there's no way this would happen again. Like, what are the odds? So I was not prepared for that at all. The first time with Elliot, I was so sad and let myself be sad, and we moved, and I found this work group, and I found some people who could handle it, and so I think I approached it better But I had other circumstances going on in my life when Bennett died. So that's what I'm talking about. I actually bottled that grief up, and I'm trying to grieve him now, 7 years later, and it is much harder. But it's all I could have done. I was in survival mode. So, when you combine trauma with loss, it becomes complicated grief. Mine is prolonged complicated grief. So it'll take longer, but like you said, you do it or you do it later. I feel like you have to do it. There's no way around it. So,
Well, and I'm just thinking about like how the body holds on to it and the implications for your health, your physical health on not grieving. Would you be able
hmm
to speak to that? I mean, from personal experience or from any experience you know about in terms of if you don't grieve, what impacts does that have on your physical health?
So I can only speak for myself. I don't have any studies or research on how it's going to affect other people. I mean, generally, like fibromyalgia is a common one. If you don't get it out, like the trauma responses you talk about, that's just bottled grief. I mean, cancer could be it. It could be so many things. Yeah, for me, it's been food sensitivities, stomach aches, a lot of tight joint problems. I'm looking into fibromyalgia for myself right now. Yeah,
Hmm.
that body holds on to everything.
What
That
about
body keeps the
anxiety
score,
or,
which is such a true
yeah,
book.
that is a
Oh,
true book.
yeah, anxiety and depression for sure.
And then
Yeah.
what about sleeping, active sleeping?
Are you bringing this up because I've had trouble sleeping?
Well, I just wonder if,
Yes,
but the anxiety, maybe it's hard to
for
sleep or
sure.
something, it could be, your experience or it could be others. And again, I'm not trying to bring up your personal, unless you want to share about it, but
hmm
I just wonder, I mean, it makes sense, I mean, the food sensitivities thing makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense to me. And, when then
hmm
we don't sleep and then we have that anxiety or that stress, that's going to increase our cortisol and our immune function, immune
hmm
dysfunction, right? So, I mean, I'm always
Yeah.
really about the connection between our trauma and our physical health, and grief is trauma. Grief is trauma. It's the loss, like
hmm
divorce is trauma for children and grief is loss. Grief
For
is
sure.
trauma for people. So, it's all rolled into that same
Divorce is loss.
divorce is loss, right? So,
hmm
it's just these things that we don't always necessarily think about that create these downstream problems. So I was just curious about that in terms of like how important it is to grieve. I mean,
Yeah.
people start crying. Goodness, it's okay. I love crying.
Well, and I will say, like, even if you're grieving appropriately and everything, I mean, you could still have problems with sleep. You could lose
Yeah,
your appetite for several months. You could have brain fog.
sure.
You can have all these problems. I mean, after the first year after Elliot died, I started losing things. Like I left my keys places or my wallet places, and I was just like so upset, asking my therapist, like, why now? It's been a year. Why am I having these brain problems now? And she's like, remember, you were like highly functioning just to preserve everything. Like your brain can only handle so much. And so now that you're in that second year, the shock is wearing off. You're feeling the grief more. You're going to start losing things, places. So just do a double check every time you leave. I mean, I was leaving my wallet in like grocery carts. I left my keys at the gym in the locker. I mean, I didn't get very far. I had to go back, but yeah, it's just what happens with grief. Even if you do all the things, check the boxes and cry every day, like there's no guarantee your body will respond to that type of emotional loss and blow. It's just a blow,
Well,
a
it's
frying
interesting because
pan,
I
like you said.
I'd like to talk a lot about how the brain, there's the left side of the brain, the right side of the brain, and when, the relational, emotional side of the brain is activated through trauma or grief, certain kinds of losses and abuse. It's, how people say, as soon as your emotions calm down, you can think logically. It's true. As soon as you can like get through the emotional side of things, then the logical side of the brain can come on. So when you're in that brain fog, you're not very clear because you've got so many emotions coming in, so many parts of you that are like, trying to get access to their healing, right? Basically getting you to notice them. And so when you're doing that, you're right. how can your brain do all of that? It can't. It can only handle what it can
You
handle.
can't.
So the daily tasks of
Hmm.
life are going to be pushed to the side and completely forgotten about. So losing your wallet makes sense to me in that kind of uh, perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I will say, one of my clients that I was working with this semester, her father passed away 2 years ago. And she's like, I thought I'd be over it by now. Why does it hurt still? And I hate to tell people, but sometimes the second year is worse than the first because you do have that merciful, like a little bit of blanketing of the emotions. Your brain just kind of softens everything so you can survive. And then as it slowly lets you feel everything so much more intensely, and then you have like the anniversaries and those important dates, and it's another year without this person. So it's setting in that this is real. That can really hurt as well. So I hope people aren't expecting themselves to be healed in a year or two. They
Yeah.
can probably go on and be fine and have
Mhm.
happy, wonderful lives, but it does not mean that you are ever going to just get over that person and you don't talk about them. And people do that, right? They don't talk about their loved one that's passed and they pretend it never happened, but that does not mean you're healed.
Oh yeah. It seems like if you're more
Mm-hmm.
healed, you'll be willing to talk about them more and like laugh and smile and like
Yeah.
remember the things that they did.
Tell
Yeah.
memories,
Instead of it
yeah.
just ignoring the situation. Yeah. I do find
Right?
this
They don't
conversation quite
exist.
helpful. Right. Yeah. And it's such a good, important thing to talk about because we do this in so many areas of our life. So I really appreciate this conversation. So earlier you were talking about how we heal in community. So what is the role of
Mm.
community in the grieving process? Do you have anything else to add about that?
I tell people like losing someone you loved is like joining a group you never wanted to belong to, and now you belong to that group. But it is
Mhm.
so healing to know that you're not the only one and to share stories with other people who are going through similar situations. It's not going to be the same. You'll never find someone who grieves exactly the same way that you do, and that's not the point. But being with other people who get it is just, whew, I mean, it's just calms the nervous system, just helps you believe you still belong with the rest of humanity because you lose a loved one, your world gets shattered and time stops for a while. And people are there for you, but their lives continue on like nothing had happened. And that's not to blame them. They're not in the same spot as you, but being with people who know what that feels like, that's the healing right there. To know that you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. Other people are going through this and you're going to make it. You're going to make it through.
Yeah, that's great. So, I like that, you know, you joining a group you never wanted to belong to. That's so true. But it's also good to have that feeling of, oh, other people are going through it, so I'm not alone. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
almost no, it's normalized. I mean, we all are going to die, so it kind of normalizes the experience to a degree. I mean, of course, you're doing it on your own, and that's very isolating and lonely. But then you do have this group that can help you feel like you're not so alone. So I like that. I think that's a great idea. I'd like to have these groups. I'm glad they have these groups and see the importance of the groups.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, group therapy can be just as effective as individual therapy, and maybe even more so in circumstances like this. But you
mhm.
said something that got me thinking because, like, we do know, we know in the back of our head that everyone we love is going to die. We're going to die, but we live in such a culture that's like so obsessed with being young and living forever. And if I have organic everything, I will never die, and my loved ones will never have anything bad happen to them. And it's such a lie that we're trying to sell the world. And so that adds to the pain of when something actually does go wrong.
Right.
Maybe people start pointing fingers if you had done this, eaten this way. We had someone say that about my father-in-law. If he hadn't had so many hamburgers, he wouldn't have had brain cancer. Are you a
Right.
doctor? Like, don't say stupid stuff like that. So,
Hmm. Yeah, well, think about people who are
you can't
runners every
avoid
day and they
death,
die. Yeah.
right? Yep,
Hmm.
they did everything quote unquote right, and death is inevitable. But we
Yeah.
don't think like that. We don't like to think like that.
But again, I think it brings up another good point about how the reason I'm so passionate about people feeling their feelings and accessing their shame and trauma and abuse in order to access those feelings and change the way we think about ourselves is because when we do that, we connect to ourselves, and then we connect to that which is greater than us, if that's what we believe in, or at least if we have more intuition, we have things that come into our awareness and help us feel very secure in ourselves, so that it becomes less fearful to think of dying. And I can't speak from experience because I don't know what that's like, and I'll probably be very scared when I do die. But it's like, if we just start to connect with ourselves in these ways, I believe it helps to soften that blow, or at least be able to approach the idea of like, yeah, I am going to die one day. And I'm sure at that point I'll find the peace or something that will happen. People find that right before they die. I mean, it depends on how they die, of course, but they can't, you know what I mean? Like, certainly, like you're saying, the back of our brain, the logical area says, we're going to die. Okay, whatever, so we don't think about it. But if we really connect in with that fear, even the fear of death before we die, before we're even close to dying, it's like, so what if I'm going to die? So what if I'm going to lose my friends? So what if I'm going to never have money? You go through this so what process, and that actually helps you release the fear through tears and things like that. So anyway, I could go on for days because I do believe in it.
No, you're
it just
right.
helps you surrender,
Yeah, you're right. We do live with like this illusion of so much control in our lives. And because death is so out of our control, it's like, no, we don't want to think about that.
Yeah.
But I will say, for people who don't feel comfortable speaking in a group about their loss, or even going to therapy, maybe they don't have the resources, there's a lot of things that you could do one-on-one with yourself. Like, you could write. There's a lot of prompts that you can just Google, like journal prompts on loss, and then just write with a pen and paper or pencil. Like, writing, that gets it out. Don't type. Right. The physical act of writing is getting that out onto paper. So that's one way that you can do it as well. I love to go for drives and just cry by myself because I do like to grieve alone. You don't have to do it in community. But you're right about the surrender that's a hard one. That's a really hard one. Surrendering to anything, but especially letting go of the fact that you can't keep yourself or your loved ones alive forever, which we all do know that, kind of, but we still like to live as if we had that power. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we do that with so many things, and when we push fear away, fear grows. It hides in the darkness, and it grows in the darkness. And so once we get the fear up and out and look at it, it loses its power. And people are still like, oh no, if I think about it, it's going to happen more. If you look at it and you feel through it, or you think about it, you're shining light on a dark spot inside of you. And that actually diminishes its, like I said, its power and control over you. And then you're sort of left in this shrug shoulders, surrender space of like, okay, well, it's going to happen when it happens. I will live more in the moment now. I will now live in this moment, enjoying my time with the people in my life, in my job, and my whatever's hobbies now, because now is all I have, right? Instead of worrying about the future death that you think you're not worrying about, but you are, because it's in the back of your mind all the time. Whatever you're worried about is there. Right. So you may as well take it out and look at it and be like, all right, let's have a chat, fear. Let's have a chat, death. Let's have a chat, I don't know. It works. I believe it works. It's just scary for people. But the more we do that, the more we do surrender, and the more we can enjoy our life now. And because we're living in constant fear when we don't accept and openly see the fear. That's my soapbox. Hope you're with me, girl. And if you're not, it's okay. So I'm
with you. I'm just in the back of my head. I'm like, how do we get to that point of being able to surrender, especially our loved ones? And that, man, we do love to believe that we have control over that. We do.
And it's a hard one. You're right. It's a hard one. I think it comes in stages. We just do it the best we can with the things now that are upsetting us. And so when we have to experience those kinds of bigger things like that, it's not easy, but we'll have like a sort of a process in motion. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I did for the money thing. This is what I did about the fears of whatever I have fears about. I don't know, the other things. But then when we have to deal with the loss of a loved one, then we're a little more prepared, and we're never prepared. But you know what I mean? Like at least we have sort of a process. But I do like what you're saying about journaling and driving. Do you have any other thoughts about what people can do on their own to help them with grief?
Yeah, whatever gets you in your body. So yoga or deep breathing, meditation, if you like exercise, swimming, running, walking. I mean, anything that gets you in touch with yourself, and then just make space. If you're out in nature and you're feeling that love for the person that died and you want to cry, cry. You know, just allow that for yourself. The more you allow yourself to let those emotions out, especially alone, then the less likely it's going to happen at the worst times, right? Like, I seem to cry at the worst times. I feel like when, like, the most inconvenient, I don't want to cry, I'm not in a safe place, and then I've held it in so long it's coming out. So the more you can give yourself that grace and just make those safe spaces, even just by yourself, and cry if you need to cry, or if you just need to curl up in a blanket and listen to sad music, or whatever your process is. There's no right or wrong, but just like you said, feeling it and just allowing it to be okay, accepting that part of you. If you are grieving, it means you loved, and that is really beautiful.
That is beautiful. I was going to say that, I like the idea of the meditation, like just being in stillness with yourself, even if you're like huddled, like curled up in a blanket and you're just laying around. The other day in my hot yoga class, my teacher put like the cold towel over our face, and and I'm telling you this because this was so helpful for grounding me into my body. Okay. It had, patchouli oil, pine, and rosemary oils infused in it. And I don't know if it was the rosemary or the pine, all of them, I guess, but I just felt like you breathed in so deeply, and just the exhale just pushed me further and further into myself. And I do that with the breathe oil too, which has eucalyptus. So that's another one. And I'm recommending that to everyone now, because I just like laid there in corpse pose, just in my body. And if I had felt like anything coming up, that would have been the moment I would have been crying. So I'm going to throw that one out there too, just because if anyone wants to try that, you don't have to put a washcloth. You could just inhale them, or one of them. You don't have to get all of them. But whatever you think would help you breathe in more deeply, because the eucalyptus one, and I think the pine, that's so grounding, right? Those two remind me of like, they can help you inhale so deeply and then exhale so deeply. And then you're just really grounding in. So that was something I just thought about as you were saying that.
Yeah.
So try it.
Grounding
You can
is
try
so
it.
good. Going outside barefoot, connecting with the earth. It's so good for you. Good for your
Yeah.
nervous system.
So good. So is there anything else you wish people understood about grief and loss that you didn't mention already?
Yeah, I wish people knew that there's nothing shameful about it. It doesn't mean you're weak. It's so normal. It's such a part of life, unfortunately. It's real. It'll get your priorities straight really quickly when you're grieving. And it's such a beautiful way for me. I believe in a God. I know people believe in other things or higher power, the universe, what have you. But for me, it's just been such a good way to get to know Him. So I would hope that we could give people that grace to grieve when someone has died. Don't talk them out of it. Don't tell them it's wrong or give them a deadline or anything else. Don't say stupid things. Just know that it's going to be you sometime. And so you're hopefully going to be that person for them that you hope will be there for you when it's your turn. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
It's part of life.
It is part of life. We are so glad you came on the show today, Becky. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up today?
I think we covered it. There's always more to say, but I think we covered a lot today. Thank you.
Yes, there's always more to say. And so I'm so glad you said that, because we'll have you back on the show again, right? You come back and be on the show with me again?
Of course I will. I would love that. Thank you.
Yeah. If you're done with school and you can give us all the good information on grief and other things then. Yeah?
Yeah, you
Promise?
got it.
Okay.
Promise.
Good. Okay, I'm going to hold you to it. All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much again for being here, and thanks to everyone for listening, and we will see you again next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.